Let me pull that up over here on YouTube on my phone. Okay. Great. I am now muting myself, and welcome everyone. Let me organize our view correctly so you guys can see our guest today. There we go. Ta-da! All right, Christine P., welcome. Oh, I'm so glad you caught this live. It's so great to have you here. And welcome everyone who has just joined. I am so grateful to be with each of you today. It's a pleasure and an honor to be connecting with all of you. Hey, Wanda Claudia. Hey, Gemini Princess, Miss Rose. Welcome. Welcome, welcome. Today, I am joined by a very special guest who will introduce in a moment. I'm just going to give more people an opportunity to join us, but it's just so great to be live with all of you again. I haven't been able to do a live in a while. And so if you're listening to this as a replay or a recording, you just want to fast forward, look under the video for a link to where the broadcast actually begins and where I introduce our special guest. Have a look under the video for that timestamp, and then you won't have to listen to me greet everybody. Hey, Twin Flame Divine Fire. It's so great to have you guys here. Awesome. And yes, please give the video a like, everybody. Okay, cool. All right. It's a total pleasure to be here with you guys. So I'm going to go ahead and dive in now. If you're just joining us, note you'll see our special guest here, Miss Stacy Hubbard. She's a licensed and marriage family therapist and certified Gottman therapist and master trainer, as well as a consultant for the Gottman Institute. Now, the Gottman Institute work is a very special body of work to me. This body of work, I ran into it, I guess, 4 or 5 years ago at this point, or maybe it was 3 to 4. And when I had heard about the research that Stacey's about to share with you all, I was really blown away, because what this research talks about is how people who come together and find a way to stay together have naturally kind of done this without necessarily needing technique like conflict resolution or nonviolent communication. There's something much more behavioral and subconscious that these people were doing that allowed their marriages to last. And the Gottmans codified this. And Stacey, as one of their master trainers and certified therapist, is going to walk us through that. Now, Stacey here earned her master's degree in counseling with a focus on marriage and family therapy from Portland State University in 2005. And since then, she began really passionately pursuing training and certification in the Gottman Method. I'm sure she has her own reasons for why this intrigued her as well. But one of them was because she really saw deep transformation with her clients when she began to use the method with them. Her practice is now devoted specifically to therapy with couples and individuals who've experienced trauma. And she offers both regular sessions and marathon therapy sessions, which I'm sure you're going to tell us what that means momentarily. And she trains therapists in the Gottman Method as well. So in particular, Stacey's sweet spot is helping couples heal from affairs and third-party interference using the affair recovery model created by the Gottmans. So that was exciting to hear, because I know triangulation can be something that is too common, but not enough information about how to recover from it. And in this interview with Stacey, she's going to illuminate the 7 principles for making marriage work created by the Gottmans. And these 7 principles, as I mentioned, are really the difference between the relationships that work and last. And it's based on scientific research, which was very exciting to me. These 7 principles can also create not only better romantic relationships, but better friendships. And they can assist you in closing the gap between kind of gray area stuff with a person and something a bit more defined, whether it's defined as just friends or defined as something more. And so that's really exciting too, because Stacey is one of the few trainers through the Gottman Institute that really brought this work, codified this work for single people, not just people who were in a committed partnership. She has a training about that. I think you did a training on that this summer. Is that correct, Stacey?
Yeah, I did one in March up in Seattle, and then I did one on Zoom in September, I think it was. Yeah.
Perfect. So you don't have to be in a committed married relationship in order to get the benefit of the principles.
Yeah.
So I invited Stacey here today as part of the Tools for Union series for those of you who are viewing this over on the K-Moon channel, because we're now entering one of the longest harmonious astrological windows between divine masculine energy and divine feminine energy that we've had in a long time. And as I've mentioned in previous videos about the astrology of this time period, it will take work to make the most of this, as it tends to always do with relationships. So if you'd like to know about the kind of work that might be required, tune in, prepare to take some notes. What Stacey is about to share will save you time, confusion, and heartache. Not only that, but if you know your connection is in a tenuous place and you'd like to do everything in your own power to create more stability and security, the practices shared in this video will be for you. Definitely make sure you stick around to the very end. Time permitting, we are going to have audience Q&A with Stacey. We'll take a couple of questions. So Stacey, welcome.
Thank you. Good to be here. Yeah, I'm really excited.
Yeah, I'm really excited to have you. So can we start with who are the Gottmans and where did this work come from?
Yes, absolutely. So let me also share, if you want to check out more about the Gottmans, the Gottman Institute is based up in Seattle, and it's just Gottman.com, Gottman. Really easy to find. They do a lot of really good stuff on social media, and they've got an amazing website. So the Gottmans are doctors John and Julie Gottman, and John Gottman, PhD, is one of the most amazing minds that I've ever known. Lucky to know him. He started doing research on divorce prediction and marital satisfaction in the 70s. And so really looking at what was causing couples to split up, divorce, or remain together unhappily. And that was really very valid scientific research. He's got a degree from MIT and was really doing very serious research. He's a very bright man, and his expertise is mathematics, research, and then eventually in psychology. So his research really began to evolve into longitudinal studies, looking at couples over time, over years and then decades, to see which couples were staying together and which couples were getting divorced or staying together very unhappily. And that started to kind of form into these categories we call the master couples and the disaster couples. And so those master couples were the couples who were really staying together pretty happily. They weren't perfect, but they were pretty happy and they had good success. They were friends. They worked through their conflicts. They had a sense of shared meaning. They trusted each other. They had a deep commitment to each other. And so we really, with the research that's been going on for 45 years now, have a really clear picture of what successful couples do. And then we also know really clearly from the research what unsuccessful couples do and how they kind of degrade their relationships. So that evolved by Julie Gottman coming into the picture. John and Julie are married. She came along about 20 years into the research, and she really said, hey, you could actually help people with all this data, right? And so she was the one that actually made the therapy method happen. Over time, luckily, the Gottman Institute has created a training program to train therapists in how to help couples get away from those, what we call the disaster traits and move into the successful or the master couple characteristics. So that's kind of in a nutshell, and I could obviously talk a lot longer about the research, but that's kind of an overview.
That's a perfect overview. Thank you. So what are those 7 principles? What's the root of them, and how would you describe them? Can you break them down for us one by one?
Yeah, let's do that. So I will say the 7 principles is the title of Dr. Gottman's best-selling book. Over well over 1 million copies sold. The 7 principles for making marriage work, and that's also the title of my singles workshop. It's the 7 principles for singles in learning how to be effective in relationship, even if you don't have one at the time. And I will, if you can pull up that document, the 7 principles overview, at least there's a visual that way. And I'll just pull it up. This is the book, the 7 principles for making marriage work. And just a note that there was a revision in 2015. So if you want to get a copy of this, make sure it's the newer one that was revised in 2015. So this is something I use in my singles workshop. And I'm just going to do a really brief overview. So I'm going to kind of simplify it and keep these terms, or the explanations brief. So the bottom, if we start at the bottom of the principles, we know this is what successful couples are doing, right? So we really learn from these master couples what makes relationships work. So we know successful couples have love maps, which means they know each other very well. They know each other's internal world. And when we talk about love maps, that's something that you have to build. You build love maps by being curious about your partner, asking open-ended questions, learning about them, all about them, their emotions, their hopes, their dreams, their friends, their dislikes, it's everything. And that really is built by paying attention and asking questions. And the Gottmans actually have a really cool app that is, it's called Gottman Card Decks, literally like a deck of cards. We use, I'll just show you some of our card decks. We use card decks in this method. And it used to be in the old days that they were literally card decks with questions on them. Now the Institute created a free app. So if you just go into the App Store and type in Gottman Card Decks, they have a free app and it's got a love maps card deck in it. And both the love maps and the open-ended questions card deck are a great way to really either build or kind of renew those love maps, really knowing your partner well. So that's one thing we know successful couples do. Then the next piece is they have a sense of nurturing, fondness, and admiration. And we really, again, we're watching these successful couples that were married for decades and happy, that they have a sense of fondness and admiration, that they share that fondness and admiration as well. Meaning they think fond thoughts about their partner and they think about what they admire and respect about their partner, and they actually communicate that. So that's a really important piece, is letting your partner know, wow, I really am proud of who you are in the world, or I respect how you interact with your friends, or I really admire this, what a great parent you are, whatever it is. And that's, that could be a romantic, wow, you look great in that outfit, right? It's really expressing what you admire and are fond of. And then the turning toward level, this one's really important. I'm going to try to do this as briefly as possible, but it's hard because this level is so important. So successful couples turn toward each other and they connect bids for connection and attention. So if you can even write the word bids in there, that would be helpful. And so bids are these small moments that happen every day. And this actually became really clear in the one aspect of the research that was called the apartment lab. And so for any of you who look more into the Gottmans, they had this thing called the Love Lab, which was an apartment where couples would stay overnight and be monitored and video recorded. And the researchers noticed there's all these small moments every day where couples are bidding for their partner's attention and for connection. And that could be as simple as saying, oh, look how pretty the sky is today. And their partner, if they're a master couple, they're connecting a high rate of those bids, which means they would say, oh yeah, it is pretty out. Or, oh, uh-huh. Or, another bid could be, oh, wow, this is a really interesting article in the paper. The partner hears it and says, oh, tell me about it. That you're connecting those small moments versus turning away from your partner, which means you're just not connecting those bids. You're ignoring them. You're missing them completely. And so we know from the research that the successful couples are connecting about 86% of their bids, whereas the unsuccessful couples are only connecting 33%. And so, I can kind of picture there's these videos from the research where this one couple is in that apartment lab and the woman's looking out the window going, oh, look at all those pretty boats, because they were on the harbor. And her partner, her husband, looks up and he heard her, but he said nothing. He looked up, said nothing, and then went back to eating cereal and watching TV. So that would be a disconnected bid or a rejected bid. So we know from the research that those small moments really matter. Those bids for connection really matter. And, I could talk for hours about that, but I'll stop there. And if you look at the first 3 levels, we call this the friendship system. That, we know these successful couples really have a strong friendship. They know each other well, they share fondness and admiration, and they connect bids. So then if we move up, would you want me to pause for a minute before I move on, or should I just keep going?
I mean, I'm already starting to percolate questions like, well, what if you don't know how your partner bids? Or, what if, your partner's ignoring your bids? Or, how do I have all kinds of questions? And what if I'm not feeling particularly fun today? So let's move through all of them, and then we'll just kind of see what things get answered via you moving through them.
Okay. So the next portion up, that kind of the green level, is all about conflict management, because we know successful couples can manage conflict, right? Conflict is an inevitable part of relationship. If you share a life with somebody, there's going to be issues that come up. So one important piece is accepting influence. That we know successful couples accept influence from each other, meaning if your partner brings up something that's important to them, or just an idea, it could even be like, hey, I think it's time for you to get a new car. Or, I was thinking about going here for the holidays. Those kind of letting your partner influence you. So instead of rejecting everything your partner brings up, it's being able to go, oh, okay, well, that's interesting. Tell me more. Oh, that's a good point. I hadn't thought about that. That we would really see in those successful couples, that people accepted influence from each other and were able to kind of take in what their partner was saying or what might be important to their partner. We also talk about solving solvable problems, and that's a big piece. Actually, I'm going to talk about solving solvable and overcoming gridlock a little bit more. So prepare to have your mind blown here. When we talk about conflict management in the Gottman Method, we use the term managing conflict instead of resolving conflict, because 69% of what couples fight about are ongoing perpetual problems that are based on differences in your personality, your values, your background. And so that we call perpetual problems. All couples have them. Successful couples know what their set of problems are, and they dialogue and understand, versus getting gridlocked on those problems. So when we talk about understanding your set of perpetual problems as a couple, that's so important. And for a lot of people, when they hear that, they get a sense of relief of like, oh, all couples have these, differences between them that might create problems. So I'll give an example. A common perpetual problem is different views on how to handle money, or different views on disciplining children or animals. Different needs around cleanliness or punctuality, being people oriented versus needing more, downtime or quiet time, different needs around excitement level or adventure level. There's, probably 50 different ones. But if you can start to have a sense of understanding what's the way we overcome gridlock is by helping the couples understand what's beneath that issue. So if we take the example of money, right? That's a common theme or a fight for a lot of couples. If you have different views and needs around money and financial issues, it can feel like gridlock sometimes if you're different. And so instead of this process we call fists in opposition or gridlock, we want to open up those and try to get a sense of, why is this so important for each of you? What's behind this or beneath this? How does this relate to your background? What do you need on this issue? What are you dreaming about on this issue? So that's really important. And that's, again, what we saw the master couples doing. They really could talk about those issues instead of getting gridlocked and stuck. And then with the solvable problems, we have a set of conflict management skills that we teach couples: how to compromise, how to repair, how to bring issues up in a gentle way and avoid the 4 horsemen. So I'll talk about the 4 horsemen in a minute. But we do have, without spending hours talking about how to solve your solvable problems, we kind of have a set of skills we call the conflict blueprint to use in order to solve, just be able to manage conflict, I guess is the way we talk about it, and solve what you can, knowing you can't solve everything. Some of those perpetual problems need dialogue and understanding, and then some compromise. So we spend a lot of time in conflict management with couples because most couples don't get that innately unless their parents were masters of relationship and they, just sort of got it. So that's in a nutshell. And again, I could talk for hours about conflict management. That's a big piece that we work on, that I work on with couples. And then the last piece around shared meaning is just knowing successful couples have a deep sense of shared meaning, which is sort of like friendship, but on a deeper level, where talk about shared meaning is that you literally create a sense of, this is what it means to be us as a couple, that you're 2 different people from 2 different backgrounds. And we always say every relationship is a cross-cultural experience, meaning you could have grown up next to each other in the same town and had completely different set of rituals and meaning and values and symbols in your house. So in order to be a successful couple, you have to create this new sense of, this is what it means to be us as a couple and a family. We're creating a sense of meaning and rituals and really talking about values, supporting each other's goals in life, and supporting the symbols and what's important to you in your home, how you want to be treated when you're sick, how do you want to handle vacations and holidays and success, and how do you handle fatigue, how do you handle loss. And so a lot of that is created by discussion, and I help couples a lot with that, because often, again, you're coming from 2 different backgrounds and you're trying to create this new sense of meaning. So I can kind of pause and we can talk a little bit about the 4 horsemen if that's helpful.
Yes, please.
Okay.
You keep mentioning said 4 horsemen.
Yeah, let's talk about it. Yeah, because that probably, out of context, it sounds weird because it's a biblical reference. So if you want to pull up that document, I can explain.
Yeah. So these are the 7 things that couples who have relationships that sustain over time are doing. Do I have this right?
Yeah, this is really this, master couples or the successful couples. This is what we learned from them, because we have this whole basically decades of research with over 4,000 couples to go, okay, we know this is what the successful couples have going for them. And that's kind of how we break it down, is by these 7 principles.
And so an unsuccessful couple would be a couple whose partnership ends in divorce or splitting up. Is that right?
Or they stay together and they're very unhappy.
I've Seen a lot of that. Okay. That
Yeah.
sounds familiar. And we would like to transcend that. So the people who've transcended that are doing these 7 things, and then there are 4 things that they are definitely not doing. Is that correct?
Well, that's a piece of the conflict management is avoiding these. Basically, the 4 horsemen are the 4 behaviors that contribute to relationship demise the most. So they're the 4 best predictors of divorce. And so, this is a great thing we learned from the research is and I'll explain why the 4 horsemen term came about. For the biblical reference there is the 4 horsemen are a sign of the coming of the end of the apocalypse. And so if those 4 things are present, it's a bad sign. Things are coming to an end. So we learned from the research that those couples who really struggled, those kind of disaster couples, were engaging in these 4 behaviors on a frequent basis. And we also know the antidotes to those are what the successful couples did instead, really. So I'll just kind of give an overview. And one thing I like to do is also refer to these as the 4 poisons, because these 4 things poison your relationship, the 4 things on the left, and then you have the antidotes instead. So that's another way to refer to it, because we have Gottman therapists in countries that aren't, where biblical references don't make sense, Muslim countries. And so 4 poisons is another way to refer to them if you don't like the biblical reference. So we really saw, okay, I'll just kind of go over them briefly. Criticism and defensiveness are really common things that happen for couples who struggle. And I see this so frequently, I can't even tell you. It's a pattern that couples get into. So criticism is what we call a harsh startup, meaning when you bring up an issue, you bring it up in a way that is harsh or critical. That's basically pointing the finger at the other person. It usually looks something like this. You never help around the house, or you're always late, or you don't think about anybody but yourself. You're so selfish. So it's a pointing the finger at the other person and blaming them. Instead of, the antidote to that would be a gentle startup, which is what the masters do. They say, hey, here's how I'm feeling about this thing, and here's what I need instead. That's kind of the formula we use. It's talking about yourself, your own feelings, and your own needs on a given issue, rather than making it an attack on the other person. So that's really important. And I work a lot with people on that, how to do a gentle startup, how to just say, hey, here's how I'm feeling about this, or this isn't really working for me. I'd love it if we could do this instead. So it's just a different way to bring issues up. Mm-hmm. And so with criticism, a lot of times we see defensiveness as a response. So if somebody feels attacked, they're likely to get defensive and say, I don't do that. What are you talking about? What about you? Remember last week when you were late? And that happens so quickly. We call it the attack defend cycle. Somebody feels attacked or blamed and they get defensive and launch a counter attack. So that's a really common pattern in couples. And so we know, with that pattern, if somebody is bringing up an issue in a gentle way and just saying, I'm really feeling lonely these days. I miss our connection. I'd love it if we could spend some more time together in the evenings. That's a gentle startup, right? Because that's just talking about yourself. It's much easier for somebody to hear that and go, oh, you're right. I have been working a lot lately. Yeah, I'll try to get off a little earlier on Thursdays and Fridays, or where you can actually take responsibility and hear it and say, yeah, you've got a good point. So with the whole pattern there, it's much easier if you bring things up in a gentle way, you're more likely to be heard and received versus being met with defensiveness, right? Some people really need to work on their defensiveness. Mm-hmm. And so some people can just be innately defensive, like they feel like they always have to be perfect or they can't ever admit that they're wrong. So even if their partner brings something up in a gentle way, they're still defensive. That's a problem, right? That we really want to look at that and go, whoa, slow it down here. It's okay to just say, you got a good point there. I can see why you'd need that. Let's talk. That's huge. So those are, probably the most common things that I see is that attack defend cycle. So I'm really working with couples on gentle startup and non-defensive responding. And then the contempt is the single best predictor of divorce. And this is really what we saw a lot in those unsuccessful couples is if there's contempt, it's a terrible sign because what it is basically is talking from a superior place and really kind of having a sense of like, I'm better than you. When you're being contemptuous, you're basically saying like, I'm smarter than you. I'm better than you. How dare, it's kind of a belligerent, sneering, mockery, sarcasm, like dangerous sarcasm. One of the examples we use is, from the research, this guy says, oh, tell me about your day. It won't take you long, which is just this like launch an attack of like, you don't do anything useful, right? It's really this sense of like, I'm better than you, you're useless, which as you could probably imagine is very dangerous in relationship. So that sense of if there's contempt in a relationship, it's not a good sign. It's really dangerous. So we know what the masters do instead is, well, actually two things. They describe their own feelings and needs, not their partner. Because if you're doing that, you can't be doing contempt, right? And the other thing they have is a culture of appreciation. So that's one of the other antidotes to contempt is if you have a culture of appreciation, your equals, your partners, there's no room for one person being like up here, if that makes sense. So we really want to pay attention to that. And if anybody who is the recipient of contempt is more likely to get infectious disease. It actually affects your immune system. If you're warding off attack, you're always, kind of on edge. You're more likely to get sick. So it's really not healthy.
Wow, that's really profound. There's research that supports that if you're a recipient of
contempt, yep, you're more likely to get sick. Infectious, disease. It's research out of Ohio State University. I can't remember the name of the people who did the research off the top of my head, but if you want to let me know, I can look it up.
It's fine. It's just fascinating.
Yeah, that's an important one. John calls it, or Dr. Gottman, sulfuric acid for love. Just contempt. It's like just pouring.
Burns it away.
Yeah. So the last one is stonewalling, which is where you sort of put a wall up between you and your partner, you're shutting them out. And a lot of times with stonewalling, people are what we call physiologically flooded. So there's this phenomenon that happens in relationship with what we call physiological flooding, where in interaction with your partner, you can actually go into fight, flight, or freeze mode. And it's so odd because you'd think, well, you're not really, under threat, but it's a perceived threat and our bodies are finely tuned to threat. And so it can happen like this, where your partner does or says something that triggers you or brings up something from your past. And you go into fight, flight, or freeze mode, meaning you are now flooded with stress hormones. And it's the same thing that happens if you were to get, somebody jumps out at you from a dark alley, or you get, almost in an accident. Same process. You can't think clearly when that's happening. So we know when couples get to that place of flooding, we want to do self-soothing no matter what, and try to take effective breaks to self-soothe, get your heart rate under control, your breathing back under control, because if you're trying to interact in a flooded way, it's not going to be productive because you can't think clearly then. Literally, you can't think clearly or hear clearly. But we know with stonewalling is that process of just basically shutting your partner out. So it typically looks like this, where you're maybe looking down, looking away, you're turning away, you're doing anything but, like connecting or interacting with your partner or making any eye contact. So instead of that, we just really want people to be aware of their physiology and say, I need a break. And then they actually do something to calm down and then come back, like within half an hour, roughly. because we know you're much more likely to have a successful conversation when you have your heart rate's normal, your brain's on correctly, and you can think clearly. So that's kind of an overview of like the kind of negative patterns and also what we know successful couples do instead, the antidotes.
Wow, such profound insight, information, and research. Thank you for sharing all of these pieces.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a lot to take in, but all of this is inside of the book, correct?
Yeah. Yeah. Yes. All of that is in the 7 principles. Absolutely. And then one other really helpful book is the What Makes Love Last, which is another amazing book that Dr. Gottman wrote. It's got a red cover. Pretty easy to find. It's pretty popular as well. I would say this 7 Principles is his best known book, but this has a lot more on trust and commitment and really how he saw couples building that trust, avoiding betrayal over time. I love this book. It's really great. But yeah, they're both amazing.
Awesome. So before we get to listener Q&A, which we're going to do in a moment here, I'd love for you to dive in to how these principles apply to people who are dating and or almost in a relationship, but not fully in a commitment. Are there modifications?
Yeah. So in the workshop I teach, it's just a 1-day workshop and we cover all these principles, as well as, I added a section about dating and learning who you can trust. Because I've found with, a lot of single people, and I was single for 8 years as an adult that's why I created the whole singles program, because I really wanted, people to have access to that and have a workshop to attend, for, learning how do I do this differently? I haven't been able to make it work in the past for whatever reason. So I added a whole section on learning who you can trust, like what are the signs of trustworthiness, which is actually in What Makes Love Last. It's really kind of cool. And learning how to choose safe people, not falling into those same patterns over time. So I just basically, we go through each principle. Like, what does it mean to build love maps, early in dating or in a new relationship, really asking open-ended questions, paying attention and building a sense of like, who is this person? They're important to me. I want to create that space and build a love map with them. Really learning how to nurture fondness and admiration and share what you admire about that person. What do you respect? Learning about bids for connection. I'd say most people, before they learn about that, they just, they never really thought about it. And then they start to realize, oh, I've been missing all these bids that my partner's making. Like I hear them, but then I don't really respond. And it's such an easy thing once you know it. And nobody's at 100%, right? That's important. Like nobody's expected to connect every single bid. But there's a balance there of like noticing your partner's bids and also sending bids, right? Like interacting. It's a back and forth that successful couples do. And then we spend just a lot of time on conflict management and learning about, what are these perpetual problems in relationship? And a lot of it is trying to reflect on past relationships, because a lot of people they'll leave a relationship because they'll feel like, well, this is a deal breaker. But then they realize like, oh, every relationship has a set of these perpetual problems. So we say choosing a partner is actually choosing a set of problems, which sounds weird, but it's true. Every relationship has a set of those because you're different people. You can't, unless you're a carbon copy of each other, you can't just line up on everything. So it's really having a sense of, okay, we're different people. We're going to have a set of these differences. So let's work with them and really understand and dialogue about them instead of getting stuck or just bailing when, okay, well, that's not working. I'm going to bail on this relationship. Well, you got to know you're going to have a different set of problems with a different person. It's going to be a different set, but it's going to be something. And then we help couples or singles, create learning what shared meaning is, how to have those discussions and really create shared meeting with somebody. So that's kind of, it's an overview. But I think it just gives people a real chance to reflect on either past relationships, their parents' relationship, and learn how to do things differently going into a new relationship, hopefully. So that's kind of what we focus on.
Amazing. So for single people or people who are like newly dating, or even for people who've kind of had something that's a bit in and out, off and on, and they just can't seem to sync up, they'd like to sync better. Where have you seen of these 7 that they most traditionally stall or get stuck? Or is there something like that?
Let's see. Yeah, actually ask that one more time. I want to make sure I understand the question.
Yeah. So for the single folks who are not in a committed marriage at this point, if they get stuck somewhere among these 7,
Yeah.
what's the most common stick point?
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah, it's probably in the conflict portion. Because one thing that's important to know is, there's phases of relationships. So that's another piece that comes up in What Makes Love Last. There's kind of 3 distinct phases of relationship. There's the limerence phase, which is the falling in lust, it's like the dopamine,
All the infatuation.
the oxytocin, and that, which is beautiful. That's awesome. It's amazing. And that's also where you can miss red flags. Because if you have high oxytocin levels in that phase, we know that if you have increased oxytocin, you're more trusting, which is great, but it can also lead you to miss red flags where you'd go, oh, that's not that big of a deal. But then as that phase fades away, you're more able to see clearly, oh, is this actually, somebody I can trust? And, oh, did I miss some red flags back there in that phase? So there's the honeymoon phase or the limerence phase, which then transitions into the trust building phase, which is typically where the most fighting occurs. Because what you're trying to do in that phase is determine, are you going to have my back? Am I important to you? Do I matter to you? Like, are you going to be there for me when I really need you? So that trust building phase can happen. It depends, really, 6 months, 2 years. Sometimes it gets really pushed by a crisis, and you can, in those moments, kind of go, oh, yeah, this person does have my back and I trust them. It can also be where things crumble because you start to, kind of fight for, am I important to you? And sometimes that's where it fails. And then, go ahead.
This was the conflict stage. Is this the trust building stage down here? 1, 2, and 3?
It's separate. I would say it's not, it's a separate thing where we look at the phases of relationship.
Got you. Okay.
But I would say that typically where that gets sort of tricky is in the trust building phase where you're trying to determine, like, are you going to have my back? Are you going to be there for me? That's where the most fighting occurs. So the conflict is where I was saying that's where people can get stuck if they don't kind of understand what conflict management is. What are the 4 horsemen? How do you build trust? That's where people can get stuck. I think.
Okay.
So I was trying to answer that question about where people can get stuck there. It's usually around that conflict, or like something happens and you kind of can go, oh, I'm not sure that I can trust this person to have my back and be there for me emotionally. But that's typically, even just learning about those, the horsemen, or how to compromise, and the antidotes, that helps people, reflect on places they've gotten stuck.
So helpful. So I've already seen a couple of really good questions come in from the audience. So, if you guys are having questions about this as you're taking all of this in, please keep the questions focused to the conversation at hand. As you can see, this is not a twin flame only focused conversation. This is a conversation specifically about how to have more successful relationships on the whole, and specifically doing so in a way that has been well researched and documented. So if you have questions about this conversation, please put them in the chat. If you have questions about other stuff, we won't be doing that in this particular interview, but you're welcome to share them at a different time. Before we get into a lot of the listener Q&A, because there's some really rich ones coming in for people who are already going, okay, I need to talk to this Stacy lady. How do they take the next step with you? And how do they just kind of, if they're not ready to like, yes, I'm signing up for therapy tomorrow, how do they just get the idea, like get to know you and get a sense of, is this right for me? Are we a fit for one another?
Yeah, so I have my own website. It's just stacyhubbard.com, and I'm in Southern Oregon. So that's easy. Or if you just want to know more about the Gottman Method or finding a Gottman therapist in your area, you can go to Gottman.com, and there's a find a therapist option, and it's separated by state, and you can just message people that way. I work with obviously my focus is couples. Yeah, that's my website. So I mostly work with couples, but I also do individual or like dating coaching or individual therapy around kind of healing past relationships, et cetera. I'm doing everything on video because of COVID. And I'm licensed in multiple states. So there's, decent chance I'm licensed in the state you're in, or I can do coaching with you. And I do like doing that marathon therapy, which you referenced, which is basically intensive couples therapy, 2.5 days in a row.
Woo!
Yeah. So it's called marathon for a reason, right?
Yeah.
But it really helps, especially with affair recovery. It's really helpful to dig in deep and not have to worry about,
Yeah.
oh, our hour's up, I'll see you next week. That's really tough. So I really like that work. It's been super amazing, even online. Like I was like, oh, I don't know if I want to do 2.5 days online, but it works really well. At some point, you just kind of forget that you're even on a computer. It feels really, really helpful. So just if anybody has questions, you can message me through my website. It's got the link to my email, or you can just send me contact me right there. Yep. So that's easy enough.
Okay, amazing. And if I'm just kind of like just needing to figure out, are we a fit? What do you have, like an introductory session? Do we have a conversation? Do we back and forth over email? How do we find out if we're a fit?
Yeah. So I would say, first of all, I'm super busy. And so I don't have a ton of openings, but even if you're just curious about the method or you want to find somebody in your state, you can message me and I'll help you get connected with somebody. But, I can do an intro, like a Zoom session for, like I'll usually do a 15-minute kind of meet and greet for free. So if people want to check that out or ask some questions, that's usually the easiest way to do it.
And alternatively, over here at Gottman.com, where do I go to find someone in my
Oh, so if you
local
go to
area?
that couples drop down, and then it'll say find a couples therapist. Yep, right there. And that takes you to the Gottman referral network.
Okay.
And so there's a drop down with all the different states you can select. It's state by state at this point, and it'll say usually people have it on their directory if they're doing online therapy, which most people are at this point.
Amazing. And if I wanted to do this kind of therapeutic work, but it would be just me, not me and a person, like a counterpart. Can I do it? Will they help me?
Well, yeah, usually. So like I do that individual work with people who are wanting to be in successful relationships, or if you're in a relationship and you can't get your partner to get on board, I do something called hopeful spouse, where you're really working with that person who's willing to engage in like, how do I do this differently? How can I be a better partner? That's totally great too.
Amazing. I think that's for this particular channel. If you're rewatching this interview, that's probably going to be right for you, for most people on this channel.
Mm-hmm.
So let's go ahead and start the process of diving into our listener Q&A, because we had some really great listener questions come in.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Allie D says, do you think it's possible to undo the damage if you have done one of the 4 horsemen in the past?
Yeah. Definitely. Great question. Yes, it's absolutely possible. Because what we're trying to do is help couples move from those negative traits into the master or the, the antidotes. Absolutely. Yes, I see it all the time. Couples are kind of learning, oh, I can do this differently. And you can absolutely get into a different track. So yes. And a lot of times I'm working with couples to repair past regrettable incidents. So if there are real, like a lot of times couples have these really difficult interactions where they're really, even if it's years ago, they're going, that thing that happened on New Year's Eve, that fight we had on the way home from your grandma's house, we can really process and repair and talk through that interaction. And we call it the aftermath of a fight, where we're processing and repairing. So that's an important skill, learning how to repair. But yes, you can definitely get away from the horsemen and into the antidotes. Absolutely.
Love it. Okay, beautiful. Thank you. Great question, Allie. And then let's see. Let me come back over here. Does anyone else have other questions about this work? I'm going to interpolate. VS says, how common are these behaviors, the four horsemen behaviors?
So common. I don't think I've worked with a couple in 15 years that doesn't have some level of it. And I'm talking, sometimes I'll get people who are CEOs of major corporations, who are physicians, who are, like high, people who, like intelligent, and they get into these patterns and they can't get out. So I would say it's, of the people I see, it's 100% that I'm working with people to get out of those negative patterns and traits and move into that master category. And so even that term of disaster couple, I don't really love that, that phrasing, because it's really, that was just without intervention. And I'm doing the work to get people out of those and get them into the master category, which is totally possible. So it's not like it's a death sentence if you have any of those. It's really just, learning how to do it differently.
Amazing. Okay. And then for our final kind of question here, let's just say that you have a spouse, but you've realized that you are in love with somebody else. How do you manage and navigate that with Gottman work?
Well, I would be really careful, because what realizing that there is that limerence phase.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit about and define limerence for everyone?
Yeah, it's sort of that infatuation, that honeymoon phase, where when you're first falling in love with somebody, it's like a lust. All you can think about is them, you're infatuated, you can't wait to see them. And so that can happen when, there's that different phase of love, of like true commitment and really building a life with somebody and having that trust. But that's different than that excitement of the honeymoon phase. And it's sort of like Disneyland versus, normal day-to-day life. So you just want to be careful about going like, is this, am I just falling for that limerence, that excitement, and giving up this, trust, this life, this attachment that I've built, because they are different. There's different chemicals in your brain that happen in both of those phases. And so it's always, I'm just wanting to caution people, are you throwing away something that you've really built, like a true attachment to somebody, for that limerence? And some people can get addicted to limerence. And so I'm just always making people, or helping people be aware of like, is that real? Or is it just that addiction to the limerence phase and being addicted to love? Because really building that trust, that commitment, that attachment to somebody over time it's a beautiful thing. And so, that's just something I would be aware of.
Yeah. My understanding about the phrase or the term limerence is that it's a physiological state where there's a lot of dopamine involved, right?
Yep.
But some of that has to do with that this person is meeting repressed needs. And so we get to, that's what I've heard. Now you tell me, you're the professional. Is that actually the case, that frequently in these circumstances where you're married to one, in love with another, some of this has to do with needs that haven't been met in the connection with the one you're married to?
I don't know about the second piece about unmet needs.
Okay.
I don't know. I haven't heard that piece of it.
Okay.
But I think it's, if there is an unmet need, though, I would, as a marriage therapist, be encouraging you to really say, work with the person you're with and really try to get the help, try to dig into like, what am I missing? What's missing for me? And bring that up with your partner rather than just saying, well, I'm not getting it here, so I'm going to get it there. Because then you're potentially throwing away, a really meaningful relationship that has all these years of trust and attachment and commitment. So hopefully that makes
Beautiful.
sense. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate you answering this question so thoroughly. You've been fabulous. That covers all of our questions. This was a crash course in the Gottman work. So I appreciate you being
Yeah.
willing to take this kind of overview approach in the limited time that we had.
Yeah.
If you'd like to, if you're listening to this and you've made it here this far, underneath this video, you will find links to all of the resources that Stacy has shared, including her website, those cards, and the Gottman website and the book. So if you'd like to jump off in that way, you can. Stacy, I thank you so very much for being here with us.
Yeah. Thank you. That was really fun.